The headline said, Package Flow Technologies not delivering for UPS because we forgot something.
Was there anyone that fought you against this and said like it wouldn't work?
She said, Jack, I love you. We did Package Flow together, but you got to stop this Orion stuff. Everybody thinks you're crazy.
Do you think they would still be the same company they are today?
Orion came within one day of being canceled.
Jack Levis spent 43 years at UPS, but he didn't just work there. He helped reshape the company from the inside out. As Senior Director of Process Management, Jack led the creation of Orion, the groundbreaking optimization system that saved UPS over $600 million and transformed how deliveries happen around the world. He oversaw multiple advanced analytics teams and became a driving force behind UPS's digital evolution, blending data, operations, and human behavior into large-scale, lasting change. Join us for our conversation with Jack Levis.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Jack. It's great to have you on here. Been looking forward to this one. We've had some great conversations already. And really looking forward to diving in here and getting to know your background and what you've brought to the table at UPS and your experience. So thanks again for taking the time.
Great. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Give us a bit more of a background, a bit more experience as to what you've done to date and kind of your career, because I know it's been a big one and a successful one. So take us through it.
Well, Julian, I spent 43 years at UPS. I retired about 5 years ago, but I got to tell you, I was shaving this morning, getting ready for this podcast, and I cut myself and the blood still came out brown. So I don't care. I'm still brown blooded regardless. I started my career in frontline operations and engineering. I sorted packages, I loaded packages, did some delivering, and then did running a couple of buildings, planning in the West Coast of the United States. And then I moved over to corporate, where I ended up being responsible for the digital transformation of operations. And that changed the trajectory of my career and honestly, my life. I lived, eat, slept, breathed data and advanced analytics and operations improvement. I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. But in the end, it was truly a transformation. We saw changes that we couldn't have imagined, many hundreds of millions of dollars saved annually through the digital transformation and the advanced analytics that sits on top of that. And I hope we can talk about how advanced analytics and transformation fit together. And then, you don't do these things at the expense of a customer. So not only did we reduce our cost, but the customer saw new products and better service. So, I don't believe in or. You can't say, do you want higher profits or reduced costs? That answers yes. Do you want better service or more efficiency? That answers yes. So I believe you can do it all. And I think some of the work UPS and the tons of partners I had showed that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic study and a case study and a fantastic project, I feel, and the experience that you've had there. And I want to get into it, just dive straight into trying to bring some value to the audience here. And I've got a few questions. I guess, help me understand the package flow technologies, the PFT kind of part of it. Was that the precursor to Orion, or where did that fit into the picture?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. So many people miss this. So, Orion made headlines. Orion was the icing on the cake. Can't do that type of digital advanced analytics optimization without a good data foundation. So that had to come first. And believe it or not, UPS was early on in this. You weren't born yet, but when we started thinking about digital transformation, that was the end of the 1990s. We didn't call it digital transformation. We called it operation simplification. But it was built specifically so we could add these pieces on top of it. So let me tell you a little about package flow technology, but please, I'd like to circle back and summarize in a second. Um, Package flow technologies. I begged to become the program manager for that, and I finally got that role. And the first step was data. Had to make sure that we modeled the business in data. And for the first 9 months, my partner and he was in IT, I was in the business. We did nothing but look at data, made sure that every decision that an operator needed to make was modeled in data, that the data supported that. And what this means is your business model, your data model needs to be forward looking. If you're backward looking at to what happened yesterday, that's nice, but it had to be forward looking. So we built package flow technologies. It was a true game changer, but it took a while. And I'd like to talk about that too, because it wasn't an overnight success. Um, it was an interesting story. In fact, do you want me to do that now? Do you want to talk about package flow?
Yeah, 100%. I guess, take us through that story. Yeah.
Well, the reason I want to bring this up is um, when you look at the headlines and the presentations, everything looks beautiful. I will tell you, you take data and you put that in a data model, and then you build some front end tools and you put advanced analytics, and it sounds perfect. But guess what? It didn't work that way. So um, we deployed package flow technologies, which was a true game changer. It was unbelievable technology that let us view data, plan from the data, analyze, adjust. We could change what drivers did when they were already on road. And this is in the early 2000s. So 20 years ago, we were doing this and monitoring drivers on road and making adjustments and communicating with customers. And when it went out with fanfare. There were satellite interviews, there were press conferences, there were cover stories in magazines. But a year and a half later, the headline said, Package Flow Technologies not delivering for UPS. And you know why that is? Because we forgot something. I spent too much time thinking about math, thinking about data, thinking about algorithms, and not enough time thinking about people and leadership and change management. So my
Yeah.
point is, you need math and psychology. We needed the psychology. And it took us a while to do that. Let me tell you an interesting story about package flow. In
Let's have it.
2013, a whole decade after it was deployed, it was named the greatest idea to steal by Information Week. A 10-year-old system was the greatest idea to steal, not because the system got better, not because it was a new innovation, but because we figured out how to truly use it and make business impact. And therefore, the measure of a good system is the impact you make, not the technology, not the math, not the data. It's impact. It all comes
It's the
down.
results. It's the outcome. Yeah, 100%.
We did Orion. That was our top goal. We worked backwards. We looked at the results we wanted, decisions that needed to be made, and worked backwards. And that's what made Orion great. It was the people that implemented it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think people overlook this so much. And or how our phrase is outcome-driven digital transformation. Our internal process of how we work with clients in these particular things is what we call PSV thinking, which is we've got to focus on increasing profitability, enabling scale, and building enterprise value. But if you don't focus on those outcomes correctly, and you think that you can leave the customer out of it, we can leave data out of it, all of these kind of things, we're not going to influence those outcomes and actually achieve those results, right? And as you said, the people are the biggest barriers to those pillars, in my opinion. One of the biggest things, and I think a lot of it is bringing them on the journey, right? The process improvements, the changes, all that kind of thing. But you've had so much experience in this, right? As to, I guess, with the package flow technologies, like what I think you mentioned earlier, you kind of overlooked the psychology aspect of it, the people aspect of it. But What do you think was the biggest mistake there, and what did you change for Orion that you like? What was your approach change?
Well, I think a thinking person learns from their mistakes. A really thinking person will learn from other people's mistakes. So I'm glad you asked the question because I hope people listening will learn from my mistakes. Um, you know, there's a famous movie in the U.S. I don't know, Field of Dreams, and in Field of Dreams, they say if you build it, they will come. Well, that was our mindset. Build the great tools, build the great technologies, and they will come. Well, it doesn't work that way. We needed to really foster change with package flow. We were changing everything. Um, and we just assumed that it would work. Early on, honestly, to defend myself a little bit, um, early on, I noticed that we weren't affecting change, that, we were running operations the same. And I made a statement back then, which turns out to be very true. I said, our data needs to be seen as important as the delivery. Or for another customer, your data needs to be as important as your product. Because if your data is not as important as your product, then the tools that are using data to make decisions are making wrong decisions. So you have to think of that. So what we did with package flow after the initial failure, we stepped back. We went through what we call the redeployment, and we redeployed it with the concept of change management, with the concept of data is important. And we measured data. We had reports that weren't performance reports of how much money we were saving. We had reports on data. How accurate is your data? And what happened over time, the data got more accurate and operators counted on it. And then the gains started coming. And it took, honestly, about 4 years to make that change happen. We took that experience and we put that into the Orion roadmap. So Orion, from a technical standpoint, interestingly enough, was not as good as package flow. Orion had a lot of blemishes and I knew them all. So from a technical standpoint, it wasn't as good, but from a deployment standpoint, it was deployed perfectly. We had change management part of the deployment. And by the way, every other system since then was deployed the same manner, where you have balanced scorecards, you have pre-deployment checklists, you have graduation saying, yes, I'm ready to take the training wheels off. And that's what made a huge, huge difference. Orion, it impacted everything UPS did, and it was unbelievable change. People, honestly, I did a TED talk on this because in those days, who would have thought a computer could have made a decision better than a seasoned planner or a seasoned driver? Nobody believed it. But
They still don't, right? There's still challenges there with that, right? It's people that still doubt, and it typically comes back to poor execution. I feel like a lot of it, which it is, we don't learn from the mistakes, we don't execute, and so we blame the technology rather than actually the process or the execution of what might have happened. And further to that, people are focusing on the technology rather than trying to focus on the outcomes they're trying to achieve, as you said earlier, and then reverse engineering that. And so I guess I always want to come back to this because for those that are listening, they may not be familiar with Orion, especially like everyone. There would be certainly people listening that are familiar with it, but to save UPS hundreds of millions, right, in regards to what it is. But just give us a short summary of like what did it actually do from an outcome perspective for UPS, right, and what were you trying to achieve?
well, the Orion story. Um, I was sitting with my chief scientist at a conference on the stairs drinking a beer. And I remember saying package flow is very successful now. We've really hit it. We've done what we needed to do. And I said, Ranga, are, are we done? is this as good as we're ever going to be? And then he talked to me about complexity, and an individual driver's route um, has so many ways to run that route that the complexity is unbelievable. In fact, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if you had 25 things to do, there's 15 and a half trillion ways to do 25 things. A UPS driver has roughly 120 stops a day. The number of options for that driver is more than the number of atoms in the universe. It might as well be infinite. It's a 199 digit number. So he said, Jack, I don't know how a human could be as good as they possibly can be when there's so many options, and we need to find ones that are better. So I said, all right, let's build an algorithm and see. And that algorithm said in the early days that we could reduce cost by a large percent. So we started working on the Orion algorithms, and that took about 5 years. And the 5 years wasn't to make the algorithm work. That happened in a few months. In the 5 years, it was to make the algorithm think like a driver, to make the algorithm understandable, something that a driver could actually implement. And it took 5 years. And once it was done, and this is kind of a discussion of the TED Talk, it was incredibly efficient. That it matched all the customers' rules, all the drivers' rules, all the UPS rules. So we started testing. Uh, let me tell you about that test, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
Very first Orion test, and again, the goal was to change the sequence that a driver delivers. So, everything comes back to decisions. So when a driver decides what I'm going to deliver next, can we impact that decision and give them a better choice? So that's what Orion does. It changes it. Now, some people will say, well, that's a traveling salesman problem, a TSP, or a traveling salesman with time windows. It's not. Orion is like the formula for Coke. It's got a little TSP in it. It's got a little TSPTW. It's got some insertion algorithms and heuristics. It's got a lot of things that are put together in order to give an outcome that a driver and a customer can understand. So the very first test of Orion, we all took bets as to what the impact would be. And when we did it, the outcome was double the highest estimate. And I made the highest estimate of savings myself, and the outcome was double that. And
Wow.
that's the first time the C-suite heard of Orion. It was a skunkworks project run by my boss and my group, and we did it on our own, and we tested it on our own. And then we said to the C-suite, we think we have something worth a few $100 million a year. In that meeting, I'm presenting the results of this test in York, Pennsylvania. It was an entire building, and the results were pretty staggering. Would have been worth many hundreds of millions a year. And the CFO got out of his chair, and he looked at the results on the screen, and he goes, wow, Jack, this is really impressive. I'm assuming your savings estimate is for a 5-year period. And I said, no, Kurt, that's for 1 year. And he's like, I don't know if I believe this. So they made us
Wow.
do 2 more tests. So we did 2 more tests the following year with the exact same results, many hundreds of millions saved. And then they said, this is big, go do 11 more tests. So we tested different environments, different operating cultures, different union rules. We tested everything. And every site came back the same.
Wow.
And
Fantastic.
But this is where change management came in. This is where, all these tests were done by corporate experts. Now my mind turned to, how are we going to implement this with 50,000 drivers with people that don't report directly to me. So we
Yeah.
had to come up with a deployment strategy, how to actually do this. Uh, that was fire.
Yeah, before getting onto that, I wanna kind of dive into the executive team and stakeholders. I've got some questions here. One of them specifically, I guess, hopefully I can ask some different questions you may not have been asked before, and that's kind of where my mind goes. But
I'd
straight
love.
away that you mentioned there is about the executive team and presenting those results, and even mentioning they may not have believed the first thing because it was so good, those initial results. But more specifically, was there anyone that fought you against this, if that makes sense? Was anyone, I know you mentioned that the C-suite didn't become aware of it till it kind of had proven it, but like always these things have it has skeptics, right? And doubters to a degree. Who, when I ask you, it's like, who fought you the most and said like it wouldn't work, especially from a leadership perspective?
Well, um, this is so. Let me tell you, there's philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, and he said truth goes through three stages: ridicule, violent opposition, and acceptance as if self-evident. And that was the topic of my TED talk because I went through those. I went through the stages of um, remember, it was a 5-year period working on Orion. It was skunk works, but I went through the stages of ridicule. That guy is crazy. You know, people are laughing at you. One day, my very, very close friend, she was my counterpart on the development side. She came into my office and shut the door. And she said, Jack, I love you. We did package flow together, but you got to stop this Orion stuff. Everybody thinks you're crazy. A computer's not going to come up with a better way. So I kept going. I got calls from people very high in the company. You got to stop this, put our money somewhere else. And we took a couple of detours based on that. But when we didn't stop, then people dug in and they started fighting the change. So they started saying, we're not going to let this happen. Somebody, yeah, for sure. You asked a question that hasn't been asked, so I'll give you an answer that I haven't given. One day, when we were getting those results, someone went to the C-suite and said that I had manufactured the results. And he was wrong. He measured it 100% wrong, but I had to go and fight that battle. It was nonstop. One day, a man who was the head of all of operations, and I need to tell you, my boss, who's passed away, did something brilliant. He is the true champion of Orion. He is the hero. His name's Chuck Holland. Chuck understood how big this was. Chuck understood the change needed. So while I'm working with my team, building the tools, making the plans, working the ground, Chuck was in the corporate office talking to everybody about Orion. And we built what we called Orion rides. We would take senior leaders, show them Orion, take them on road in a rental car with the Orion tool in their hand to show them one after another. And he did that so that the C-suites, everybody up top, understood. And we did that with everybody: the CFO, the CIO, the president of strategy, everybody. But we did this for the head of all of operations. And after we showed him, he goes, yeah, this is nice, but everybody's going to hate you. I don't support this. So we had to fight that battle. It was one after another. But once we started deploying, once we started getting the gains in 95% of sites, they got the gains as expected. Then people would say, yeah, this was obvious. Of course, Orion was going to work. It was evident. So there, I'm spending time on this because maybe there's somebody in your audience who's struggling and thinks they've got a great idea and going through resistance. You're going to go through ridicule. You're going to go through violent opposition or some kind of opposition to get to acceptance as if self-evident. That's why I'm saying that. But you have to do it right. You have to understand change and change management. And I learned more than I could ever have thought I could learn from the Orion experience on change and change management and how to enable that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that. It's a brilliant insight. And yeah, it's to anyone listening though, I was saying, no, from just my own experience, nowhere near as much as yours, but it's like, you are going to get that resistance. You're going to get those people that doubt it. But when them results are there, you've got the proof, right? It's kind of the proof's in the pudding. The results are there. You can't argue with the results. The challenge is, and sadly, I have seen a lot of failed initiatives that had great potential, but they just got slammed. They got pushed down. They just got ridiculed too much by, if for this is more about to leadership out there. Yeah, great. You obviously persevered through, and in a bigger company at UPS, etc., that's got the funding, I guess, it got the backing. It's easier to do this at smaller companies or even medium-sized companies that not necessarily can't continue doing that to a degree. And I guess haven't got that bigger of a team as well. It's not to say that it's any easier, but they can sometimes those issues can get, or those ideas, sorry, can get quashed and kind of get squashed down before they've even had a chance to fully materialize, if that makes any sense. And I guess you go on, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, but for the folks there, and I agree with you 100%, we need to think backwards. Too often, and I did this with package flow initially, you got a project like that and you're going to think about what tools do I need to build, what data, what algorithms. That's the math. We have to remember the psychology. And the key is to understand decisions. So decisions are where the big savings are. There's savings in automation. Don't get me wrong. You can automate, you can put in rule systems, but from my perspective, it's impacting decisions, not just in automation where the savings are. So think backwards. What are the big decisions that your organization makes that if you could impact those decisions, you could have a large impact? Is it where a building should be built? Is it how much inventory we should have? In Orion's case, it was what sequence does a driver deliver? But what are the decisions? Then you go backwards. What information do I need to supply to impact that decision? What tools do I need to build to supply that information? And what data do I need in order to feed the tools? And when you think backwards, it becomes clear. You end up where you didn't build a tool and people go, why'd you do that? I don't need it. So you got to think backwards. And then you have to think through change management and enablers that allow operations to execute. I learned something early on in Orion. When we were doing those 11 tests, one of the sites was struggling. And one day their results would be good, the next day it would be bad, and they were struggling. So I went out there for a visit. And what we noticed is the operators in the morning were talking about the same thing they did before Orion was there. Their conversations were the same. The metrics they looked at were the same. Nothing had changed except there was this extra tool on the side. So guess what? Orion was getting ready to be a flavor of the month. Flavor of the month means just something that's important now, but not important later. So our challenge became, that was an aha moment. How do we change conversations? How do you change what people talk about in the morning when you put out something like this? And we came up with new metrics. We need metrics that are what they look at now that support Orion. And I think my project manager did something brilliant. I didn't understand it at the time, but he did something brilliant. Those metrics that we gave the operators, the vast majority of them were not on results. We didn't measure them on how many miles they saved, how many dollars they saved. There was a little bit, but not much. You know what we measured them on? Is your data accurate? Are your plans of high quality? Are you overriding the solution? And are you following the plans you created? So think about that. If you are doing all of those things and you don't get results, it's not really your fault, it's my fault. I'm the one who gave you a tool that you did everything I asked you to. And that became great. So they focused on leading indicators, and the C-suite cared about lagging indicators. So I'd report to the C-suite on dollars saved and customer service, but to the frontline operator, they focused on things that made Orion successful. Leading indicators in the front line, lagging indicators in the back and the end. Um, and then that became more important than Orion. That model became how all UPS tools deployed. So every tool that we deployed after Orion, about 6 months to a year before the tool would deploy, we would say, what do we need for metrics for a balanced scorecard? Make sure that's in place, because sometimes you have to make sure you're gathering that data. What training do we need to make sure is available to operators? We would have pre-deployment checklists. So you can't deploy the system unless these things are done. And then we'd have metrics on you're not done deploying until these things are in place. And that showed up in a balanced scorecard. So there was proof that you were ready to take the training wheels off. And it worked for every system.
Yeah, so much of this is based on data from my perspective of just it's all about giving the data into the hands. We're going through this ourselves internally as a company and just in general with clients that we work with. But if people don't have the right data, how can they influence it? And as you say, if they're working on kind of lag data or lag indicators, right, then we're just looking in the review. We're not looking forward.
Couldn't
And it's
agree
so
more.
important about that. It's so important. And our whole job, as you say, if we focus on the outcomes and focus on what we're trying to achieve and we provide the data there, then we get those results, right? Most people focus on features, not outcomes. Feature-based digital transformation and not outcome-based digital
I couldn't
transformation.
agree more. I couldn't agree more.
I was just going to say, if you imagine like like another company like UPS, but just say any company out there right now, and I want your kind of thoughts on this, not necessarily specific to Orion, but more for someone that's looking to build their kind of Orion, right? Their kind of system, their in-house thing, any company. What is a mistake that they are definitely going to make that you feel?
Um, I think the biggest mistake's going to be change management, not understanding change management day one. That's the biggest mistake I've seen. Uh, Second, which is a umbrella term, right, is not looking at your data as important as your product. Additionally, and this is another big one, the physical world and the virtual world have to sync up. So think about this. And this is why, remember I told you how package flow failed initially? It was ugly. I felt like I was on the witness protection program for package flow technologies. Um, I was not allowed to use that term with investors. Investors were upset. And the reason was we didn't synchronize the virtual world and the physical world. You have to treat them the same. So imagine a driver pulls up and says, okay, I've got to stop on 123 Main Street, because that's what the virtual world says. But physically, it's not in the back of their vehicle. So they just wasted time and money. Some other driver has it in the back of their vehicle, but it's not in their handheld. So you need to make sure the virtual and the physical always stay in sync. So those are there's other, by the way, things that organizations should do in front of that. One is, as I said before, I don't accept or. Do you want better service or lower cost? Yes. I don't accept or. You need to have a mindset that it's and, not or. Another thing is understand little things. Something I learned when I first went to UPS, when I first started, the founder of UPS started UPS in 1907 with $100, a bicycle, and a telephone. And he said that if you watch the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. So look at little things. So I'll give you an example. 1 mile per driver per day at UPS. Just reducing 1 mile is worth $50 million at the end of the year. So I don't need to look at giant things. Can we get a mile? That's $50 million. Can we get 2? Look at little things. They make a difference. 1 minute per driver per day is $14.5 million. So when your mindset is on little things, you realize that if you can impact this little thing over and over and over and over again, it's a big thing. So you need to have that kind of mindset. The other thing I would ask your audience to do is understand analytics. And analytics goes from descriptive analytics, which says what's happened or already happened, predictive analytics, which is where package flow is, which says what's going to happen, and then prescriptive analytics, which is what should we do. And you need to understand that. And this was a game changer for UPS as well, from my opinion, because I used to explain that to the C-suite and operators and leaders over and over and over again. And I used to say, there's descriptive analytics, predictive, prescriptive, and as you move through this continuum, your business impact grows. That leads your mindset to start changing. When someone says, I want to do something, you go, oh, well, that's just descriptive. Okay, that's good, but my benefit's going to be less. What can we do in the predictive world? One day I explained this to the head of delivery operations, and I explained to him descriptive, predictive, prescriptive, and where we wanted to go. And he got it. The light bulb went off. And he said, well, descriptive analytics is like doing an autopsy. He said, my operation's already dead. I want to be predicting and prescribing. And so that mindset is helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And what you said about that 1 mile per driver per year is just 50 million just per mile. Saving that 1 mile is incredibly powerful. And I think anyone listening, the focus needs to be on where do we find those little enhancements? Where do we find those improvements? And often, in my opinion,
pay attention to detail, find your little thing there. It's got to be there. And you move that needle a little bit.
100%, and a scale, it just makes such a big difference. And I think a lot of people don't really, I think it's a mindset issue. It's a process issue. It's a lot of people are just looking in the wrong areas, I feel, and not focusing on the right things. And again, we come back to this, not to sound like a broken record, but they focus on the technology or the features, not the outcome. And if the outcome is how do we make it more efficient for our drivers? How do we give them a better experience and the customer a better experience? Then we can save the money. We can do quicker deliveries because we're saving time, everything else. It's so much about just focusing in the right areas, right? And this is just, you did this at scale, which means that you solved a massive problem. There's a lot of monetary benefit for the company, but the experience, it's not an end-all situation, right? It is the end situation, not all, right? It's like, how do we actually make this happen where we can achieve both objectives? But when we don't focus in the right areas and we have the wrong mindset, we just end up going, it's too hard, or we can't do that. And then we blame the execution rather than the actual, we blame the technology or whatever rather than the execution.
And go back to my point, the people, the front line executing, what are they going to do? If they're not getting the gains, what are they going to do? So you have them focus on the things that will get the gains, the leading indicators. That's how you make it work. And then when this is in place, it's a gift that keeps on giving. Because once you really start implementing something like this, where you have a great data infrastructure, frontline tools, and advanced analytics on top of it. By the way, the fourth pillar is leadership and change management. But once you have all of this in place, an algorithmic change can now come in play to support new customer initiatives. So Orion can continue to gain over time. And that, I got to tell you, that shocked me. That really shocked me because a site in its second year did better than they did the first year. Even though Orion never changed, they improved. And their third year was better than the second, and the fourth year was better than the third. And that's because the operators learned how to fine tune things. They learned how to use this digital infrastructure to truly make gains. It wasn't expected. Um, I did have to go to the C-suite 3 times to tell them that we were wrong in our estimates for Orion. And all 3 times we had to tell them we were going to get more savings than we thought. So they're not used to it. They're not used to it coming in. Hey, we want to give you an update on benefits. They're used to saying it's going to take longer or less. We go, well, I'm sorry, but now that we're looking at it, we're going to increase our estimates.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I guess that's amazing. It's such an inspiring story of like how this, if it's done right, this change can make significant impacts and especially at scale with organizations. But I guess from your perspective, what's one thing that Orion did that and fixed that UPS didn't even realize was broken? Right. So that's one of the questions I've noted down here as we've been talking. But from your perspective is, yeah, what's one thing Orion fixed that no one at UPS even realized at the time was broken?
Well, that's a little hard, but let me tell you, I'm going to give you a couple of things. So they're really not, to be fair, it's not something that no one realized. No one just could understand it. So let me give you 2. And the second I'm going to give you is much bigger than the first. So UPS has time commitments. That's an important part. So we can't do things on our schedule. A customer paid for a 10:30 delivery or a noon delivery or a 2:00 delivery or an appointment. So a driver has to keep all these things in their head. We took that away and Orion now makes those decisions. That's great. But what we learned, or what we were finally able to see, was I could optimize your day, but if you still have to make a pickup at 6 p.m., there's now time that you're waiting to make the pickup. Do you follow what I mean? So I'm done, but I can't do anything because I'm waiting for the pickup. We call that wait time. And for the first time, wait time was exposed. This driver can't be any more efficient than what we've got because they're waiting on a pickup. They have to get their deliveries done. Their premium was done by 10:30, and you got to make a last pickup at 6. So we learned that you had to put more work into that middle, that those constraints were costly. And that was kind of an aha moment. And that moved to, what's the proper time for a driver to start? And that's what people started doing. There was one other thing that's much bigger than that. So that was something we all knew. It was never exposed before. We never had a word for it. But then we could say there's 30 minutes of wait time on this route. What can we do to eliminate the wait time? Something else happened that was much bigger than this. And this was a collaboration with finance and sales and my team. Orion works on a single route. Put it in there for a route. Well, why don't we make it work and simulate business processes? So what we did was we started saying, what if we put in a new product? Let's run 1 million simulations and find out what our true cost is of that product, or what's the true cost of products we already had out there. So prior to the Orion, we thought that giving a customer an appointment cost us this amount. We could run 1 million simulations and find out, what does it really cost? What does it cost to deliver in this zip code? What if we changed rules? And that was a true eye-opener when we started understanding cost based on Orion. And we could run millions of simulations. So it really helped us understand our cost because we knew what that constraint really mattered. So
Yeah, interesting. It's very interesting. I think that's a lot of where it's our job for someone like ourselves as a partner, someone's working in this, even if you're in house, you're doing this in the business, whatever. It's your job, as you said earlier, in that change management, in that executive discussions, and whoever it is, the team, you've got to bring them on board with what you're trying to do. And I think a big part of this, it comes back to the fact that if we don't do that, if we don't bring them on board as part of that process, to be clear, then we're going to have a lot of issues, as you're saying. But what we need to help them understand as part of this is that we may not even know what we're going to find out, as we go on this journey, right? We're going to find things that we probably never even realized. We're going to find these discoveries and things that are incredibly powerful that we just otherwise wouldn't have even considered. And I think that's just something that we need to get that buy-in. We need to get that support, as you said, and it's that change management part of it. It's that people process, but just helping them understand that as we go throughout this process, as we implement it, as we learn, we're gonna learn things ourselves that we never really thought was possible, and we're going to apply it in different ways, as you just suggested in these simulations, that we never even realized it could be massive game changer for the business. So I guess I got one final question related to Orion on this particularly, and I want to interested in what you would say into this year. But if UPS hadn't invested in Orion and you hadn't done Orion, do you think they would still be the same company they are today? And would they even be in the game? What do you feel about that?
Well, I'm biased, so honestly, the answer is no. Um, let me tell you, I started with UPS in 1976. Maybe your parents weren't born yet. I don't know, but um, I saw a lot in my 43-year career. When I started, UPS didn't even yet deliver the entire 48 states of the US, but went on to deliver every address. We had hardly anything outside the US, maybe a few deliveries in Canada, and went on to serve 220 countries, hardly any air service, and became the ninth largest airline in the world. But from my perspective, the biggest impact to operations at UPS was the impact of data and technology. And Orion was the cornerstone. So I think UPS would have been the same? No. I think Orion taught UPS how to truly be a digital organization. It impacted everything. I told you go from ridicule, violent opposition, acceptance as if self-evident. Towards the end, before Orion was deployed, but when it was really getting a lot of traction, then all of a sudden, I was getting calls. I want to have an Orion of sorting. I want to have the Orion of transportation. So we ended up with roadmaps for every operation with an Orion type tool in the middle of it. So, that changed everybody's mindset. Um, and I'll say it one more time, 4 cornerstones: good data infrastructure, forward-looking data, make sure that's in place. Put tools on top of that data to view, cleanse, analyze, plan, and monitor the operations. Those two together is digital transformation. Add advanced analytics on top of that for predicting things like Orion optimization. And the fourth pillar is where psychology comes in, leadership and change management. Those are the 4 things you need. Um, and it works everywhere. And UPS ended up understanding it. Orion came within 1 day of being canceled. 1 day. So it was that close.
Wow. Wow. It's incredible story, and I appreciate your time, Jack. I've learned a lot in the conversation that we've had, and we could go on forever, but it's clear that we just have to manage the outcomes. We have to learn, we have to manage the people, but we focus in the wrong areas, right? We take the wrong approach. It could be the difference between, as you say, a $600 million saving for the business at that scale to just a project getting canceled, right? So imagine if that had been the case, and we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. We wouldn't be discussing, these lessons that have been brought to the table. So I appreciate.
Or, analytics by definition is taking data, turning it into insight for making better decisions. So if you have data that doesn't turn into insight, that's entertainment. But if you get insight that doesn't turn into a better decision, it's trivia. Trust me. And we have a lot of that. Somebody says, "Oh," and you can tell when somebody comes into my office and goes, "Did you know?" No, I didn't know, but what are we going to do about it? That's trivia. The "did you know" is trivia. Insight that doesn't turn into a better decision is trivia. Think about it like the dog chasing the car. Once you catch that analytics, what are you going to do with it? That's the key. Work backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic, Jack. And thank you once again. And that's a wrap for this episode. And I appreciate everything that you've shared. Clearly, we need to focus on those outcomes. The audience would have got some fantastic value. We appreciate you sharing the insider's view of Orion and your history all across the career, all your learnings as well. And anyone listening, you can go to Intuji.com. We got our learning center. You can check out the YouTube channel for Pulse. Got a lot of great episodes. Once again, thanks, Jack, for coming on. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. My pleasure. You're great. Thank you.
Thank you.